Hello, welcome back to The Rationalists. Thanks for listening to us. Today I think we'll get topical. It seems like after the killing of George Floyd and the protests we've had all across the country that it's the right time to talk about this type of thing. So much has been written about this and spoken in social media and all that. And so I'm hoping to present maybe a few views that you haven't seen and again talk about this rationally, taking the emotion out of it if we can. So first, kind of a disclaimer, I think anybody that speaks about this today has to do this and say there can be no excuses for the killing of George Floyd. None whatsoever. The cop who killed him should absolutely be tried for murder, and the other policemen that were there are accomplices. And so, again, that happened. It shouldn't have happened, and the people should be held to account. And this shows two things that must change. There's a lot of talk right now about how we change policing. And there's a lot of insanity out there about, defunding police and things like that, which, yeah, who are you going to call when somebody comes into your house with a gun at night? No, I don't think so. But we do need to make changes. And so these are two examples of what must change. First off, using lethal holds when they are not needed. There may be a time or two when they're needed, but it certainly wasn't in this case. You can't argue that. So that's got to change. And I think even more importantly is cops kind of have an unwritten rule. And that is if you're partnering with someone and they do something wrong, you don't say anything in front of the victim. You don't stop the other policeman. You support him as your brother. And while you do need to have support, that has to change. You have to speak out. Just like people are protesting across the country now, if you see something wrong, you have to speak up and say so. And the police have to do that when they see other policemen doing something wrong. That being said, I think it's very important to remember that being a policeman is a terribly difficult job. I mean, it is hard. And there's a fine line between getting things right and wrong. And like any profession, you have some bad apples. Any profession has bad apples. But does that mean the whole barrel's rotten? Do you throw out the whole barrel because of a few bad ones? No, you certainly don't. You do everything you can to get rid of the bad ones, but you show support to the police. You let them know you are valuable. Do Black Lives Matter? Sure. Do White Lives Matter? Sure. Do Blue Lives, policemen, matter? Absolutely. They must be shown our support. At a time when everybody's railing against them, it's more important than ever to say, we'll help you, help yourself. Stand up. If there's a bad apple, let your superiors know about it, and that gives us more ability to support you. Police have a hard job, and it's a very difficult thing to do, and we need to support them and show them our support. And in doing so, it will encourage them to get the bad apples out. So that's kind of my thought on all of that. The protests themselves are very valuable. I've never been one to go out in the street and protest, but part of the reason I don't is because I know I have the right to protest. Take that away from me, and everything's different. And it's the same kind of thing. We've seen protests turn violent quite a few times now. And that's very unfortunate. It obviously detracts from the message. Well, why does that happen? Well, one thing, as you know, is because we've had an unusual time with this coronavirus. And people have been, stuck in their homes and they need release. That's not an excuse for violence at all, but it's one reason I think that we've seen it. But why are there other reasons? Some people are always looking to hijack moments for personal gain. But if you look at police and say, well, there are a few bad apples there, doesn't it make sense? There are a few bad apples in every group. There are a few bad apples in the protest group all across the United States. Are there many of them? No. But they are the ones that do the most damage to the movements. And so if you're part of one of these protest movements and you see people using violence, you need to stand up and condemn them just like you want the cops to do among themselves. Very important. We need to self-police our own groups and eliminate violence. It's just very important. Another part of what we've seen here has been taking down statues. This is kind of interesting. First off, you have to condemn it because it's public violence. It's mob violence, and you can never support that. Are some of these statues ones that probably should come down? Could well be. And there have been some cities that have taken some down on their own. And that's how you do it. You do it legally. You go to your representatives and say, I want this statue taken down for whatever reason. We can never support mob violence. Never. But as a part of this, I've been around a lot of the South, and probably particularly places in Georgia, but maybe South Carolina too, and others. You see a lot of these Confederate generals that statues have been made of. And if you're like me, you're from the North and you go down South and you see all this, you kind of chuckle. You kind of go, why are there all these statues everywhere? Don't you guys know you lost the war? And you know, you kind of chuckle at it. Now, that's my attitude. I'm obviously white. I guess I can understand how blacks might look at it differently and say, well, these are oppressive symbols to me and I don't like them. So, okay, I can understand that. Again, go through legal channels to get these things changed. But it's also gone further than this. You know, everybody's so politically correct. So some places are taking down statues of George Washington and Christopher Columbus and all sorts of people like this. Well, let's remember two things. First, you can't judge someone who lived in 1776 by the standards of people who are living in 2020. I don't mean you excuse wrongs that have been done, but you can't look at what goes on today and say that's how everybody should have acted 250 years ago. No, it doesn't work like that. You know, pieces in time. That's where this person lived. This is what was expected. This is how they acted. Does the good they did outweigh whatever bad they did? In most cases, yes. So let's not do revisionist history. I remember a few years back reading about, well, I think it was one of the Smithsonian's, but anyway, it was a large museum in the United States that had a caveman exhibit. And what they did was they changed it. They had a family of cavemen, if you will. And the father was in front walking. The mother was a couple paces behind and to the left and holding a child. And what they did is they went in, they changed it, and they moved the woman up so she was right next to the man because they thought it showed, sexism, prejudice, that she wasn't equal to the man. Well, isn't that what that time period was? Aren't museums to show you history? Just because it's wrong and we don't like it doesn't mean that we go in and whitewash it. Show the past as it was. If you want to learn from history, if you want to change things now, don't change things back then. That's what the Communist Party of China does. They say we've always been this great people and all that. No, show history like it is. So when it comes to taking down statues, let's take a look at the people in the time they lived and did they do more good than they did bad? If so, then it makes sense to keep them up. Let's look at it this way. Martin Luther King did a lot of great things. We all know that. There are streets and buildings, schools, all sorts of stuff named after him all across the United States. Are you aware that he was a serial adulterer? He cheated many, many times on his wife. Okay, is that the reason that we should change all the school names, take down the street signs, and take down the statues of Martin Luther King? Because he was not a perfect man. He did bad things. Okay? It's just like everything else. Everyone has faults. I have faults. You have faults. We all do. Do they outweigh the good you do? Probably, hopefully not. And if not, then a statue is a worthy thing. But let's be realistic about it. No one is perfect. Was George Washington perfect? No, but he was the father of our country. He did a lot of wonderful things for us. We have to remember these things and not go crazy with taking down statues of people. Some deserve to come down, but even if they do it through legal means. Part of what is being talked about today now in the protest movements is racism outside of just police, but what they're calling systemic racism in society. And I reject this. Are there racists out there? Of course there are. Unfortunately, there always have been. So you look at any group, they need to feel good about themselves, and so they put another group down and say we're better than them. It's through the history of mankind. It's always happened. Economically, color, all sorts of things. It's unfortunate. Human beings are so flawed. So, is there racism? Yes. Can we wipe it out by snapping our fingers or making laws against it? No, that isn't what changes it. And so I reject systemic racism. Is it built into society with laws and codes and etc. that are prejudiced against blacks? No, absolutely not. How many places have affirmative action, which is, the exact opposite? It's preference for blacks. So I reject systemic racism. I do not believe that it's built into our society. I believe racism is all practiced on an individual level. All the laws and everything have changed. I think that's a very important point. So when you go about saying we need to eliminate racism, which everyone or most people will agree to, how do you do it? Well, you don't do it through just passing more laws or these kind of things or affirmative action. That isn't what works. Instead, let's look at what does work. So when we talk about this, let's take a step back. There have been waves of immigration into the United States over the history, and especially during the 1900s, there were waves that came from Europe, and they've been from all countries, but when they did, so let's talk about the Irish, the Germans, the Polish. They came over for reasons of what went on in their own country, like the Irish potato famine sent a lot of people from Ireland here, but other things sent groups here. And every single one of those groups received bad treatment, and people were prejudiced against them at that time. So think about it. If you were Italian for a long time, you were automatically associated with the mafia, and you were called a Dago or a Wop or whatever. Polacks, Polak jokes. There's still a lot out there. Most of my Polish friends tell me them because they've gotten past it. But German and whatever, there were nasty words associated with these people and prejudice against them. But do you see that today? No, you don't. If you see an Italian today, do you assume they're in the mafia? No. If you're talking to a Polish person, do you bring up Polish jokes? No, but he may, because they're pretty good about it. And so why did prejudice against those groups go away? Well, if I come to America from another country and I speak a foreign language, then I'm going to have an accent. Unfortunately, most people, when they hear a heavy accent, they think that person's not very smart. It's not true, but you kind of get that impression. It's just kind of what happens. But then my children go to American schools, and they're brought up and they play with the people next door and all this, and they don't have the accent. And that right there makes them fit in. And a lot of these people, there have been waves of Asian immigration. And the Asians have family histories of respect for your elders and education being very important. So you look at the Asians that are in America today, education is critically important to them, and they're the highest percentage of people that go to colleges from any group. Very important. So we all know education and poverty are tied together. If you want to get out of poverty, you need education. Does it mean it's the easiest thing to do because in some cases it takes money? No, it doesn't. But that's one of the things that's going to do it. So as these groups came to America, they got educated, they lost their accents, they rose up the ladder, and prejudice went away against them, didn't it? Yeah, it did. So why has prejudice remained against blacks? Well, first off, you can't justify it. I'm certainly not trying to. But let's look at some of the reasons why. Okay, first off, ask yourself this. The people who are black and who have been successful in America, and let's leave entertainers and sports figures out of this because that's where they had an individual skill that they were marketing and using. So for general people, we don't have that. So let's talk about people who have advanced that were black. Barack Obama, pretty good example right there. Well, he educated himself, got a law degree, did very well. Let me ask you this. When you listen to Barack Obama speak, does he have a black accent? No. He doesn't have a white accent. He learned the language of business. So I'm not saying that black people should speak white. I'm saying black people should give up the accent that they purposely keep and speak the language of business. The language of business is what will help you advance in business. So if you don't have education, you act like a thug, you're going to be treated accordingly. Is that stereotyping? Absolutely, and I know that. But that's what happens when you have large amounts of a group that won't advance. There are so many black Americans that have gotten educated and have become entrepreneurs and done very well for themselves. Between that and the fact that white people voted for a black president, you just have to reject systemic racism. It doesn't exist. It's against individuals. How do we change those individuals? You need to do the same thing the Germans, the Italians, the Dutch, the Irish, they all did. They acclimated not to be a particular way other than what they were, but to acclimate to the world of business. And the world of business says, here's what you do. You do these kind of things, you lose your accent. These are the kind of things we must do. If I'm black and I want to make sure that my children are not, do not suffer from racism, then why do I give them a crazy name that stands out? Your last name is whatever your last name is. You can't do anything about that. But the first name of what you give your children, think about applying for a job today. Do you go in and see somebody? No. The first thing you do is it's over the internet. You send out job resumes. And these resumes are cut down for all sorts of reasons. I mean, it's common, 3,000 applicants to a job. So how do I, say, okay, here's Bill Johnson, here's, Joe Smith. And how do I choose between them? Well, if they've got the same qualifications, and I look at one and he's got a crazy first name and I'm racist, boom, he's out. But if I don't know from looking at his name that he's black, well, I'm going to have this guy in for an interview. And then he's on his own and he can get the job on his own. But we stop giving crazy names, stop speaking black. This may sound prejudiced to you, but no, I'm saying be like every other group. Accept the world of business, not white, the world of business. Adapt to the world of business and you will rise up in it. So we need blacks to help themselves. You talk about defunding police, that's not going to help blacks. I think we're all aware, maybe you're not. The biggest killer of blacks, it's certainly not policemen, it's not white people, it's black people. The biggest killer of blacks is black people. We need to help blacks to help themselves. But here's a question for you. You got two people, doesn't matter what color they are, and they both are suffering in one way or another. But one of them is doing everything they can to advance themselves. They're going to college. They're working 3 jobs. When I met my wife, she was working 3 jobs to advance herself. So I see one person who's working 3 jobs and is struggling to pay for their education, but is doing these things, and another who's doing nothing to help themselves and screaming, give me reparations, and these kind of things. Who do you want to help? You want to help the person who's helping themselves, don't you? Absolutely. It makes more sense. You're probably going to be more successful in your efforts to help them. So how do we do that? Well, You talk about defunding the police, that's not going to help. That's going to make matters worse. I think any rational person knows that. But you talk about taking some of the money from the police and giving it to them to help with mental health crises and, showing here's a proper way to raise your children and these kind of things. I don't know if that money comes from the police, but wherever it comes from, that's a good idea. That's the kind of thing we should do to help them help themselves. Absolutely. So, how do you help people? First, you want to help people who want to help themselves, not just complain. And second off, let's do what works the best. It's not defunding the police, it's helping with social services and other ideas like that. Those are great things to do. So finally, we come back full circle to the protests that are going on, and you look at places like Seattle, where they abandoned a police station and boarded it up and let protesters take over 6 square blocks of downtown Seattle. And the protesters wouldn't let police in and all this kind of stuff. This is an example of the inmates running the asylum. What are you, crazy? You close down a police station and you give the streets to the people, and then you act surprised when there's violence and killings within that area? This is literally insane. These are not the things that will help anyone, just like defunding police won't help anyone. So, the right to protest and the very right thing about protesting George Floyd's killing, they're all good, but they're bad apples in every group. Weed out those bad apples, don't throw out the whole barrel. That's kind of everything I'm saying here today. So other than that, I want to say thank you for listening, and I have a petition online, which you can sign if you want. I would enjoy it to make all online retailers like Amazon list the country of origin of the products that they're selling, because it's on the box but it's not listed online. We need to do that. We've got to stop buying from China. So I know that's off topic, but please sign that petition. I would enjoy it. Other thing is, let your friends know about these if you like them. I'm having a lot of fun with these. I appreciate your comments. I hope you'll leave some more. Subscribe to it, like it, all those kind of things, and have a great day. Thanks.